All right, let's go ahead and get started. So welcome everyone to our fifth webinar for this year's Texas Academy for Marine Policy. I am Alyssa Schultz, the graduate director and host for this program. So the aim of this webinar series is to build off of the foundation that we laid in last year's program, where we learned a lot about the local, federal government structure and processes, the role of science and policy, as well as for policy, and how to communicate science in the policy sphere. If you've missed any of these talks, you can find past webinar videos on the Texas Sea Grant YouTube, which is also embedded on the TAMP webpage. And so this year's webinar series revolves around ocean governance, policy, and regulatory bodies. And today we have a really great speaker, Dr. Sarah Cooley, who will chat with us about navigating the science policy interface and sort of give us some insights into her path and how she got where she is now. As always, if you have any questions or thoughts during the talk, please feel free to put them into the Q&A function on the bottom of your screen or hang on to them at the very end. We will have some time for questions and interactions with our speaker following the talk. So with that, let's meet today's speaker. Dr. Sarah Cooley is the Director of Climate Science at Ocean Conservancy in Washington, D.C. She has been at Ocean Conservancy since 2014, having also been the Director of the Ocean Acidification Program and also its Science Outreach Manager. She was a coordinating lead author on the Oceans and Coastal Ecosystems chapter in Working Group 2 of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change's 6th Assessment Report, and recently provided expert testimony on the ocean impacts of climate change to the International Tribunal for the Law of the Sea. Dr. Cooley's scholarly focus spans ocean carbon cycling, science communication, and science-based policy development. She was trained as an ocean carbon cycle scientist and numerical modeler, then moved into interdisciplinary science. At Ocean Conservancy, she works to educate and engage decision makers and stakeholders from every political perspective at regional to international levels about ocean acidification, identifying ways that different groups can take concrete stepwise action on the issue. In her work, Dr. Cooley combines science synthesis, strategy communications, political strategy and advocacy, and public advocacy. So with that, Dr. Sarah Cooley, I will hand it over to you.
Thank you so much, Alyssa. Thank you for having me here. And thanks to everybody for taking some time out of your day to come and join us here. I'm looking forward to talking with you and telling you a little bit about my career trajectory. I'll start my slides. It seems like it's working. If that's not true, please let me know. So as I thought about this title of navigating the science policy interface, really what's it about is how on earth did I get here? How did I get, training as a carbon cycle scientist and then move into working on marine policy? It's definitely been a path that I didn't expect, but it's been really, really fulfilling. So I'm happy to tell you about it, and maybe it'll give you some inspiration as well. So I'll tell you a little bit today about sort of how I got into oceanography, and then kind of what happened after grad school, after my formal training. I spent a little while in academia after that, and then I'll tell you a little bit about how I moved from the ivory tower to, the Beltway, to the DC policy environment. And then I'll finish up with some thoughts about kind of what skill sets, what philosophies that I need to have in order to actually do what I do, and what's gotten me here, which things I have leaned on and which things have been most useful to me. So I grew up sort of salty, sandy, and sciencey along the Atlantic Ocean. Until I was 8, my family lived on the New Jersey shore. And we lived on the part of the New Jersey shore that is within view of the Manhattan skyline. So it's pretty far north. It's really central New Jersey, where we had beaches, but it was still very built up. And yet I still wound up spending a lot of time outdoors, with my family on the beach. My dad was really into small sailboats. And so that's the size sailboat that I learned to sail on. And that's kind of how crowded it looked when it was me and my mom and dad and my brother on our little sailboat when I was a kid. I also was always really sciencey. I was always interested in thinking about how things worked. I was always interested in, the kinds of books that give you the cutaway, or, taking stuff apart, kind of watching over my brother's shoulder as he took apart, bigger stuff, hair dryers, toasters, you name it. But, I played with, STEM toys of the time. Right there, you can see that's actually this little like do-it-yourself computer where you can like wire together different terminals and you can have it like quiz you on stuff. It was super primitive. But it was fun. I mean, it was cool. I really liked solving puzzles, and I read compulsively. I still do. I'm a huge reader, and I've always just been really, really curious. So when I went to college, I went to Haverford College in Pennsylvania, which is a small liberal arts college. And I wound up finding my way into a chemistry major. Chemistry always kind of just made sense to me. I was really interested in physics, although not as skilled a physics student as I was a chemistry student. So I wound up spending a lot of time in the natural sciences building, which always smelled super weird because of all the organic chemistry that was taking place in it. And then every weekend, I was involved with the sailing club at Haverford, where we were racing these small boats almost every weekend we could. That was, we were kind of like the broke club sport, traveling in vans and, just kind of staying up late and not being good to ourselves and having these massive bruises from sailing all weekend, but it was a lot of fun. And after college, I really wanted to figure out how I could combine like the science piece and then the boaty piece. And one day I had this big epiphany sort of towards the end of college, like, oh my gosh, there's chemicals in the ocean. That might actually be something to pursue. So I actually did 2 National Science Foundation REU projects 2 summers in a row. And that really helped me understand, yes, I really did think that oceanography was for me, partly because I didn't have to close doors on different disciplines. I needed to know a little bit about chemistry, a little bit about biology, a little bit about physics and geology to understand what was happening in the ocean holistically. And I really, really liked that. I went to grad school at University of Georgia, spent a lot of time in the Marine Sciences building, which was mostly under construction while I was there. I was being converted from an old PE building to our Marine Sciences building. And again, the boat thing came out. I spent a lot of time on the weekend racing other people's sailboats, very like non-fancy, basic sailboats. But then I also spent hundreds of days at sea on research vessels in about 3 years' time when I was in grad school, and I was collecting seawater samples and measuring their carbon dioxide content as part of my dissertation project. But when I was in grad school, in addition to doing these things, sort of academically and for fun, I was also exposed to science journalism as a specialty. Pretty late in my grad school career, I took a class in science journalism where we kind of tried our hand at science writing, and I really, really liked it. I had always been interested in writing well and conveying, ideas very capably and clearly to audiences. It's just sort of one of the regrets of my life that I'm not very good at writing fiction, but I can talk about science. So after I graduated with my PhD, I really wasn't sure what I wanted to do because I was feeling like, no, being a professor is not the right fit for me. What else is there? The science communication and science journalism piece really kind of hooked me. And so after I graduated, I became a freelance science writer and editor. And it was very, very good for me to learn how to pitch a story and how to interview someone so that when I was on the receiving end of those appeals, I could actually do a pretty good job of fielding them. So I did some of that, and then I became a technical editor for the American Meteorological Society journals in Boston. And what I was doing there was really working with scientists who were publishing their papers in peer-reviewed journals to make sure that in the editing process that their scientific meaning wasn't lost. So that was a really interesting piece of science communication to be involved in. I also spent time as a postdoctoral investigator and then later as a research scientist at Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution. I was working on ocean acidification broadly. When I moved to the Cape Cod area and I was working at AMS Journals, I was also working at WHOI, kind of was like a half-time kind of thing on both sides, which was interesting to balance. But my postdoctoral advisor had some work to do some science communication for ocean acidification. And he was like, I think you're a good fit for this because you understand the science behind it. And then while I was there, I kind of got pulled back into the science. I got excited again about numerical modeling because it's the lab I was in. I got excited about scientific visualizations for ocean acidification. And I was able to dive more into the numerical modeling side than I had been able to in grad school. So it really kind of it was a slippery slope back into science for me through working on ocean acidification. And I spent a lot of time thinking about how can you detect significant change in ocean acidification and what it actually means to the rest of the world that isn't a carbon cycle expert. And while I was working on those questions, I also realized that carbon cycle scientists were really speaking to ourselves, but there was really a need to speak to others because the applications and implications of global ocean change in the carbon cycle were really much more far-reaching than just, carbon cycle scientists are talking to, ocean physicists. So that kind of opened the beginning of my work with the U.S. Ocean Carbon and Biogeochemistry Project. While I was at WHOI, part of my time was supported by working with the OCB, being the ocean acidification scientist on staff. And what I did there was I worked with the project to help coordinate science community research activities, which included things like public statements and research priorities. And while I was doing that, I started to interact with the policy world. In 2009, the Federal Ocean Acidification Research and Monitoring Act was passed into law, and that authorized NOAA to begin to set up its ocean acidification program. And so I was in a close conversation with federal agency program managers about what does the research community need and how can federal agencies help fill that need or, pull the research community forward in various ways. And I really, really enjoyed these bridging activities. I've always been a big picture thinker, a forest thinker rather than a trees thinker. And so trying to think about how all these big pieces fit together into a large community of research was really, really appealing to me. An example of some of the work that I did at Woods Hole is really thinking about how ocean acidification and ocean-based climate change will affect people. And I really started thinking a lot about how scientists talk to others about these sorts of complex issues really effectively. So that actually caused my science to change. My science became very, very multidisciplinary at that point. And I started bringing in data and techniques from other specialties to begin a really holistic evaluation of the effects of ocean acidification and interactions that it would have with fisheries resources or coral reef ecosystems. And I'll be honest with you, I felt like a poser for a lot of this time because I was bringing in economic information or social science approaches to try to unpack what we think the long-term influence of something very quantitative, which is ocean acidification, what that could have. And so that was really, really kind of eye-opening, because instead of being, kind of like flogged for being a poser who doesn't know what they're doing, a lot of people were saying, hey, I'm really glad you're doing this, because I really don't know how to get the word out about the thing that I'm specialized in. And I realized that we really were all just learning how to talk to each other about our specialties. And so I got very involved in helping the ocean acidification community talk about this issue with one voice and to others. And that was something that I really did a lot of while I was the ocean acidification scientist with the OCB project. This image is actually from a project that I led, sort of bridging the time that I was at Cooley and then later when I moved to Ocean Conservancy. And what we did was we did a synthesis of information that looked at the ocean carbon cycle model projections of ocean acidification regionally. We also looked at the economic indicators for a region. So basically, what kind of job and economic diversity existed in an area? How dependent was an area on something like their shellfish harvests? And then we also looked at other complicating factors like algal blooms, harmful algal bloom frequency, or upwelling occurrences, and whether there were any river inputs that could be causing coastal acidification to be worse in an area. And that really gave us a very much more detailed picture of how coastal acidification could be influencing shellfish harvest around the country. And that was really important at the time, because shellfish aquaculture, specifically oyster aquaculture, was really going through a boom period where a lot of small scale growers were setting up business basically all over the country. And there was a real interest in, locally grown food, and also the local flavors that that different waters would impart to these harvests. So really synthesizing this information together was, something new in terms of how we can take something that is, a climate model forecast and make it relevant to people today. And the NRDC logo is on there, not because I worked there, but I had one of my co-PIs leading the project was at Natural Resources Defense Council. Okay, so that takes me to the end of the time that I was at Woods Hole. In 2014, Ocean Conservancy was hiring for someone who could communicate technical information about ocean acidification. And I was like, that's something I do every day, but I also do the science. I'm also involved in really pushing forward the boundaries of what we know. Is this something you're interested in? And Ocean Conservancy thought about it, and they said, actually, yes. They had originally envisioned someone who was more communications oriented, but they thought that having someone engaged in the science would be a really new and interesting feature. So initially, my duties as the ocean acidification outreach manager were to create synthetic products of information that were intended to educate policymakers and non-experts too, and also to raise up stories from the ocean acidification stakeholder community and the science community. And so it really was like the storytelling project, but it was very much like making sure that this complex issue was getting discussed in a way that was faithful to the science. In 2016, I moved into the director position to run the program. And in 2020, we put ourselves out of business for that program. I'll talk about that in a second. But now I'm the director of climate science. And this is a photo of me providing testimony on the ocean impacts of climate change to the House Space Science and Technology Committee, their environment subcommittee in 2019. And that was an exciting and terrifying activity But it kind of goes to show you just how like being ready to communicate about the science is something that has there's a real appetite for that in many, many places. So one thing I wanted to really take a moment to unpack is that when I moved to Ocean Conservancy, my science did change. I didn't step away from doing science entirely, but it changed pretty significantly. I was trained in graduate school and at my postdoc to do, you know, quantitative chemical oceanography. So, you know, in graduate school, I was titrating seawater samples. I was analyzing just how much carbon dioxide was in different parcels of water, and I was tracking those parcels of water. When I was at Huey, I was running and developing numerical computational models. And when I came to Ocean Conservancy, we don't have laboratories, we don't have computer clusters. But what we do is we analyze what's going on in policy and what conditions have led to, or what conditions and situations lead to progress. And so I've actually done a number of papers which are kind of like applied policy analysis. You're really looking at, okay, you know, here's this issue, ocean acidification, for example. What options for action are there for different types of leaders? What actions can they take? What actions have they taken? Where might they choose to go? And really looking at the overarching patterns we see in those sorts of things. So it's really still looking at, you know, what's happening, what outcomes a particular activity or change will have. But it really is kind of using a different test population, right? Instead of like water parcels, I'm looking at policymakers, you know, or instead of thinking about how can we build a numerical model that will tell us something, I'm looking at, well, how can we analyze what laws have passed around states to understand the influence of some factor on decision making. And so, as you can imagine, a lot of the work that I do is related to legislative engagement somehow. I do a lot of education and outreach with elected leaders, and then we also do some lobbying. Ocean Conservancy is a 501c3 organization, which means that we are allowed to do a certain amount of federal lobbying each year, up to a particular cap. And there's a very specific definition of lobbying federally, and there are specific rules we have to follow. But what that really looks like to me is that once in a while, my colleagues in the government relations department will send me a piece of legislation and say, hey, what do you think about Section 5? You know, it's talking about the need for, I don't know, a data registry on harmful algal blooms. What do you think? And so I go through and I read it and I think about like what agency they're asking to do this and what's already happening, and is this needed? Is this new? Is this correct? Da, 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 da. And then I can provide line by line feedback on that, which is something that I never thought I would be doing. I also am really involved in science assessments and different types of syntheses. All this alphabet soup on my slide, it stands for a number of the high-level reports that I've been involved in. There's the 4th National Climate Assessment, the 5th National Climate Assessment that just came out, the 2nd State of the Carbon Cycle report, and then the last IPCC report. And, you know, I was not trained to do these synthesis reports, you know, and quite frankly, everyone is learning on how to do these sorts of very condensed assessments of the science that apply confidence language. I'm sure you've run into IPCC confidence language. It's like, you know, there is a very, it is, you know, the conclusion is that, you know, it is entirely certain that, you know, human influence has altered climate. You know, there is a very high confidence that sea level rise will be thus and such. So the very high confidence piece is a product of a very specific protocol of evaluating the information, looking at the quality of the information, the amount of information, and kind of judging sort of among experts just how to classify that evidence. So that's kind of a neat thing to be part of, but it's darn hard. And so it's a very different way of writing about the science. But I find that being able to synthesize information and really like pull together the weight of the information on a particular issue has made me a better scientist in a way, because I can look at the field of information and really see where information is rich or whether it's lacking. But then I can also really identify where those gaps should be closed to help us make better decisions that are informed by the information that we have from science. So this schematic is actually the chapter concept map for our IPCC chapter. And you can see the like wide swath of stuff that we covered. We went all the way from, heat and carbon dioxide invading the ocean to, how do any of these things influence achievement of the UN Sustainable Development Goals? So it was really, really a crash course in sort of all the freshest ocean science. And one of the things that working on the IPCC chapter gave me, really, really helped me develop was how to project manage. I was leading this project with people spanning 14 time zones for probably 3 years during the pandemic, when it was variably affecting colleagues around the world and, shutting down various, aspects of our lives, either workplace access or library access or, childcare access. And so it really helped me learn to lead these collaborative projects to really generate the kind of information that decision makers need to help inform their decisions. And so one of the things that is, that I kind of summarize what I do is really like thinking about how do issues that emerge from the science, how can they be best integrated with policy? And how can policy make space for the newest science? So it's really kind of a dialogue that I see myself as being at the center of, or maybe I'm a catalyst to help really make sure that the science and policy are interacting as effectively as they can. And I always, kind of break scientists' hearts by pointing out that, no policy decision was ever made because of the science. That's only a factor. There's so many other things that go into policy decisions. But as long as we can make sure the science is comprehensible and it is speaking to the questions that it can, that it can, help inform, then we're doing right by the science. So, yeah, okay. I will go on and talk a little bit about a big win that I experienced as coming into the policy space. I mentioned that I worked with the Ocean Acidification Program, and that I led the program for a number of years, and that we basically put our program out of business. So the program at Ocean Conservancy was in existence for about 10 years. And we used strategic communication, education, stakeholder engagement, and federal advocacy that really just all boiled down to show that acidification is happening right now to real people, and yet there are things that can be done about it. And during this period of time, it's important to kind of remember that there was a whole lot of climate denial in Congress. There was a lot of rejection of even, being able to mention that the climate was changing. And ocean acidification was sort of a new issue. It did not have that kind of baggage, but it was an outcome of fossil fuel emissions. And so ocean acidification gave us an opportunity to talk about global change and how it was affecting the ocean, and how it could be acted upon right now but really making the issue more real to people by having constituents in a decision makers, in a member of Congress's district, having that shellfish grower come to DC and say, my multi-generational business is at stake because of this. That's when decision makers really listen. So over the and that's an example of strategic communication and stakeholder engagement. When we pair the right message with, carried by the right messenger at the right moment to the audience, you can really make some stuff happen. So in the 10 years that the program was in existence, we counted success by, four metrics here. Our message was widely adopted. The fact that acidification was happening now to real people, but it was addressable. We also worked with state, national, and international policymakers so that they could actually discuss the solution set. They had things to say on what the options were, what could happen. And then we also found that we worked with bipartisan leaders to really identify solutions. And we had Republicans and Democrats both saying like, hey, we really need to invest in research, or we really need to be thinking about managing inputs to our waterways. And then we also had the success that NOAA's ocean acidification program had doubled the budget. We worked every year on federal appropriations policy, which is basically working to appeal to Congress, to the people making the budget, saying like, hey, this budget needs an increase. Here's why. Here's the good work it's done with the previous money you gave to it. So that was a really exciting outcome from the work that we did. So also, right now we're working on marine carbon dioxide removal. It's an emerging issue that is really on my mind today. What we're really interested in thinking about is how marine carbon dioxide removal research can support decision making. There's lots of research that's spinning up right now. There are a lot of questions that decision makers have, but we need to make sure that, again, the science is serving a society's needs. So there are a bunch of different groups that have different questions. Climate policy leaders have certain questions. The public has other questions, and ocean users, fishermen, or companies that are putting up offshore wind generation facilities, they have questions too. And what we want to do is really make sure that the research being done does support answering those questions. We also want to be thinking about how can these technologies be net beneficial. We want to make sure that they're beneficial to the climate. So, verifiable carbon removal would be the metric there. We also want to make sure that they're beneficial to marine ecosystems. We don't want to be having all of these technologies work great for removing carbon, but have a really detrimental effect to the marine ecosystem or to the people who depend on the marine ecosystems. We can think of a situation where a marine carbon dioxide removal company comes in, goes ahead, does its business, does not engage or employ local ocean users. And then maybe when the resource is depleted, the ocean room for this is used up, they might leave, and local folks who depend on the ocean are none the better. So those are the things that we want to be avoiding, right? We want to make sure that these things can be beneficial. And, kind of put briefly, this issue brings in a strong ocean justice component. It really brings in the need for multidisciplinary research and kind of community-led decision making about new uses and prioritization of ocean activities that are like making sure that all of the existing uses and new uses and longstanding perspectives are all at the table. Recently, I've been part of creating this code of conduct for marine carbon dioxide removal research, which is sort of step one in helping practitioners understand just how do they engage local communities in making these decisions together? How do they look out for outcomes for marine ecosystems? That's something that's really been on my mind lately, and we'll see where it goes because it's an emerging issue. But that's kind of the state of my thinking on it today. I'll wrap with thinking a little bit about sort of what skill sets and things I need. This is actually a picture of me providing expert testimony at the International Tribunal for the Law of the Sea this September. That was described to me by legal experts as being basically the Supreme Court of the ocean. So that was terrifying to give this testimony. But I wore my climate warming striped scarf, so I felt pretty good about that. And what I did was I did what I always do. I described the ocean impacts of greenhouse gas emissions to the tribunal. The tribunal is deciding a question right now about how responsible parties to the UN Coordinated Law of the Sea are for acting on climate change. So we'll see what they have to say. But this was, again, one of these like amazing and terrifying things that I found myself doing. So when we think about what skill sets I need, I've had to draw on for doing this work. I always start out with communications. It's always the writing. It's always the public speaking. Which didn't come easily. I'll be honest. I have never gravitated toward public speaking, but like loads and loads of media training and loads of exposure has made it tolerable to me. This nonstop exercise in media training and science writing have really helped me break down issues to reach audiences where they are and talk to them about what they care about. My ability to research and synthesize new issues really fast that kind of got honed during graduate school, and being able to self-teach about new issues, either policy, legislative content, how a numerical model works. Those are really important skills that I draw on all the time because there's always a new issue or new details that I don't know anything about that I have to get up on really quickly. Certainly my ability to see the big picture and make connections to other issues has been an asset. It's definitely a reason why I never felt like I super fit in as a academic scientist, because I was always like, oh, it's like that TV show. And I'd get a lot of blank looks from scientists, but working kind of at that interface, being able to make those connections actually is an asset in helping meet people where they are, and describe issues in a way that fits their mental models. Really being endlessly curious and willing to learn about new issues all the time is absolutely a key piece of what has brought me here. Regarding the opportunities, I have to say, say yes to weird things. Saying yes to writing this report for the Coalition of Small Island States about, how is climate change affecting the ocean, led me to what's in this picture, presenting to the Supreme Court of the Sea. By saying yes to joining the IPCC report writing team, I wound up leading the whole chapter when one of the other co-lead authors was not able to carry out that duty. This was an amazing team management skill builder for me. And, I've said yes to unexpected collaborations inside my organization and outside of it. And I have this amazing professional circle that I learn from every day. The only reason that I know how to read and think about legislation is by the kind teaching of my colleagues who are lawyers and policy experts. So really kind of just saying yes and open to a lot of things has really kind of paid off. That curiosity continues and is actually an asset here. Talking a little bit about staying inspired. One of the things that I struggle with, my colleagues struggle with, and maybe you do too, is a lot of anxiety and grief about climate change. And that's something that's a struggle all the time. I'm working with a group of colleagues to kind of share our feelings and just understand that, like, all climate related feelings are okay. I'm the one who shows up every month and I'm like, I'm angry. I'm angry again. I'm angry this month. And other people are like, I'm sad. I'm sad. So one of the things that we really struggle with is staying inspired when we are documenting these impacts every day and fighting for change. And I think the thing that keeps us from completely, tossing in the towel and just, saying we can't do this anymore is that our work every day it's the marathon. Like, that is the work, showing up and doing little by little on trying to speak for the ocean when it comes to climate impacts, when it comes to solutions that are being proposed that affect the ocean. It's showing up every day and it's doing the work. It's that marathon. Because I'm actively working on this, that feels good. But the other thing, the flip side of that, is it's too easy to say yes to everything and let that curiosity and the, interest in surprising opportunities get the better of me. So that's something I'm really working on. I'm not any expert in that yet. I kind of go through these like sprint times and then these rest times. But I'm starting to say no to things a little bit more, and I'm always proud when I do. But it's very easy to kind of count everything as being part of the work. Everything is part of working on climate action, if you can like view it one way or another. And that's where you have scope creep and things really start to get the better of you. So if anybody has advice for me on that, I'd love to hear it because I struggle big time. So I'll stop there and I will, just keep this up for a moment. If you want to email me and get in touch, you're welcome to. But then I will maybe stop the sharing so that we can have a little bit more of a Q&A.
Thank you, Sarah. That was such a great talk. And I mean, I learned a ton, especially as the grad student that is sort of like, what am I going to do next? I have no idea. And I know several in our audience feel the same way. So that said, the Q&A is open. So if any of you have any questions for our speaker today, feel free to put them in there.
Yeah. I'm also curious about like what folks are thinking about as they look ahead to after grad school. Like, what gets you excited, or what do you find like, yeah, I could never do that. Like that's also helpful to kind of talk about what where everyone is. Before we began, Alyssa, you were mentioning how you kind of knew right at the beginning that you were going to be looking outside the ivory tower.
Yes, I never went into grad school wanting to go into academia, but it has still been sort of a maze and with twists and turns and dead ends, and I'm still trying to sort of figure out what I want to do next. But I am also like at the beginning of my career, so I'm really excited for whatever does come my way or whatever opportunities do present themselves. So I'm excited and I'm scared and terrified and excited.
All the things that it loops back around. Certainly, I can talk a little bit about what how a number of my colleagues have found their way into policy. Definitely Sea Grant fellowships are probably the number one way. Like everybody, not everybody, but like countless people I work with have either kind of come up into policy from Knaus Fellowship after grad school. They spend time either, in a congressional office or in an agency, and they get kind of a real insider look at how how the science policy interface works. And, I didn't go that way because I didn't know right out of grad school that I would wind up in this space. And I think if I had, like, things would have been a lot more straightforward, let me tell you. But I probably would not have found myself into working on issues that are sort of the application of the carbon cycle. Like, I may have found my way up into, an agency role or something, which would be really different. And it would still be supporting the science, but it would be maybe not quite as much a direct application of what I was trained in, which I find myself doing now. So that's kind of a neat little, what if thought experiment we can do.
Definitely.
Yeah.
My co-director for TAMP, Tacey, she can't be here today, but she is currently a Canals Fellow. So she is sort of winding her way through an entirely different world with a completely different language.
Mhm.
And I think she's loving it so far. She
And
doesn't really,
where is she working? What's her placement?
she is in National Ocean Service.
Okay. Yep.
So yeah, and she wants to stay in DC. She's just really, I think, really into being surrounded by all the things. And
Mhm.
yeah, so,
Yeah.
but yeah, for myself at least, I think I don't know, my unicorn job would be like 1 foot in the science, 1 foot in the application and policy and strategy. So I don't
Well,
know.
there's definitely, I think, more jobs like that. I mean, I think that there's certainly NGOs have a lot of, scientists on staff. Ocean Conservancy is, one of many. And what was interesting to me to move into the nonprofit space is that, it's like an ecosystem. Every NGO has a slightly different way of doing things. So some NGOs have, like, departments of scientists on staff, and they go do research cruises, like they go do field research. That's tends to be true in some of the bigger NGOs, especially. But Ocean Conservancy is fairly small as things go. And so we don't have as many folks who are, sort of like lab connected scientists. We have a couple, but it's not really as common as you might find in like a TNC or like a WWF. And so, and I think there's, in the WWF and the TNC type examples, there's a lot of folks who are working on, very applied questions with their science. And so you really can have that, hey, I've got muddy feet, and it's enlightening this particular policy question. So I do think those roles are out there. And I think I think it people find their way in different ways to those, but I would say a lot of the folks I know in those positions were also Canals Fellows too. So
Yeah.
Sea Grant is a great pathway to help kind of expose you to the options, and you don't have to wind up simply in government service after doing one. So that's an important distinction to keep in mind too.
Yeah. The Canals application's currently on my desktop.
As I'm sure it's true for many people,
Yeah,
right?
I am working towards it.
Yeah.
The other thing I really love, I worked for a Galveston Bay Foundation for a while, and that involved a lot of outreach events and talking with stakeholders and going to marinas and chatting with the Coast Guard and people with boats. I grew up sailing as well. And so I really love that aspect, and I definitely don't get to do a ton of it especially in academia.
Yeah.
So I would have to attach that to my unicorn job if there ever was one.
Yeah, I think that's important to think about. I work with a lot of early career staff to think about what's going to make them happiest. And, a lot of times people will come and work at Ocean Conservancy and they'll be thinking about, do I go back to grad school? Or, I just came out of grad school. What's my next step? Or I just came out of undergrad. What's my next step? And we I encourage people to think about, like, excuse me, do you like those public facing roles? Do you find them energizing? Some people really do, and some people don't. I'm one of them. So I need to be a little bit more sort of behind the scenes, for my own best satisfaction. And there really are roles where you can kind of take that kind of outreachy thing. I mean, going back to the Sea Grant piece again, there's issue specialists at Sea Grant offices around the country. You'll have like a shellfish specialist or something, and like that person has that close and deep relationships with the community, and a deep bank of science expertise and kind of connections into the policy space to see how it all fits together. So I definitely think that there's a lot of those roles, but a lot of times when we're in grad school, we don't get a really good view of those because we kind of just see the faculty that we're learning from and the postdocs who are doing the postdoc thing. And so we kind of get this very sort of narrow view of what's available to do with our specialized education. And I think I haven't come up with a good way to overcome that, but I do think that if you have that like grumbling in your brain that like, this isn't quite the right fit for me, it basically means you've got a lot of digging to do. You start digging on about different roles and different opportunities and different organizations, as well as thinking about what your personal strengths and interests are. And after all that soul searching, hopefully you come out with something really good. It took me a long time to do it though. So I think I want to be honest that like, it's not something you can just sit down with like a hot cup of tea on a snowy afternoon and come out with like magic.
Right.
There's a lot of pain and suffering that goes on with figuring that piece out.
Yes. And I think that your advice to say yes to weird things is really quite important to sort of tease out what you like, what you enjoy, what's fulfilling to you, what's draining to you.
Yeah.
And so I've tried to make a habit of my graduate career to say yes to weird things that come through my inbox, and it's worked out really well. I've been on a handful of panels where, I mean, I don't know how they found me, but they did, and they thought I'd be an expert. And so
Good.
that was really fun. And they were completely different groups of people. So sort of figuring out how to talk to different groups, from students to local governance to whoever. But yeah, saying yes to weird things that's fantastic advice, I think.
Yeah, I think, but like I said, there's a bit of a knife edge you have to walk. It's easy to overdo it. And as you say yes to weird things, you will put yourself in the situation of going like, oh, this is a fizzle. Like, no. And so there'll be the awkwardness of like, how do I extricate myself from this, activity? If it's like a long-term thing that's not a fit, or, if you just kind of like endure the like super weird panel that you're part of, or, you know what I mean? Like there will be duds along the way.
Definitely.
But, that's part of the learning process, part of figuring out what excites you and what doesn't. I think it's good to be gentle with yourself, to try lots of things. And recognize like, oh, you know what, I felt really uncomfortable here, even though folks seemed happy, whatever.
Yeah. Well, we are just about at time, but thank you so much for being here and for being so candid in your path and from the beginning to where you are today. I enjoyed it so much.
Great. Well, thank you for having me. And I'm happy to answer questions, happy for anybody to reach out and just, drop me a line and we'll chat. But But yeah, I mean, I wish I had a magic wand to be like, here's the recipe. But a lot of it is kind of like this journey, but remembering that you don't have to be perfect at everything from the beginning. And that includes knowing what you're going to do when you finish with all this. So if the science and policy area is something that excites people, but they don't know how to do it, I definitely encourage them to think and try again, rethink.
Thank you so much. And thank you for everyone that attended and viewed. I appreciate you being here as well. Our next and last webinar, I know this was supposed to be our last one, but we added another one. So happy holidays. It will be on Tuesday, December 19th, the 19th, where we will have two speakers from the Marine Mammal Commission, Brady O'Donnell and Lori Leach, and they are going to talk about the Marine Mammal Commission, the Marine Mammal Protection Act, and conservation efforts therein. And as an added bonus, my TAMP co-director, Casey, will make her return as host. So it'll definitely be a good one. I hope to see you there.
Thanks a lot.
Bye.